Okay, our next speaker has spent the last 23 years imagining new technologies and bringing them to life in projects as diverse as virtual Earths, flying robots, and mixed reality wearables. Avi Bar-Zeev has been involved with cutting-edge startups like Intrinsic Graphics, F5 Networks, and Linden Lab. He has developed core technologies for Second Life, created early concepts and prototypes of Microsoft HoloLens, designed and built the first instance of Google Earth, and helped to develop Disney's Aladdin's Magic Carpet VR ride. He will be taking the stage with a call to arms, talking about the Internet of People. Please join me in welcoming Avi Bar-Zeev to the stage.
Thank you. So I've got the Madonna mic, but I promise you I'm not going to dance. You don't want to see that. So I am humbled to be sharing the same stage. Some of the talks earlier today, hopefully you were there to see it. I'll be referencing some of those people who've inspired me for a long time, Steve Mann, David Brin, talking about some of the same themes. But they said it probably better than I can, so I'll just reference them. So yes, I've been doing this for about 23 years. I've worked in some really small companies, and I've worked in some really big ones. And I'm here to help try to convince you to take action, to call to arms. I want to explain what I think the problem is, and I want to talk about what I think is the easy solution to gain the kind of world that we want to have. So, see how to start this. Big companies are bringing big magic into the world. Big companies like Microsoft, like Google. Now, I use the word big magic because we're all here because we know that AR and VR are bringing magic into the world. But we don't tend to think about it in the context of who is bringing it. What does it mean? What happens when the business model of the company affects the way that they approach the technology? Big magic can either liberate us or it can enslave us. Now that sounds a bit harsh, and I was a little worried about coming here and saying that message today until I heard David Brin talk, and I said, okay, I'm off the hook. He's put it out there. Any new technology, the more powerful it is, the more likely it is to either change the world in a positive way or a negative way. Yeah. Sorry. I'm still on the same slide. It's really up to us whether it's positive or negative. And that's really the thing I want to motivate you to take action on today. I came here 2 years ago to talk about how AR and VR bring superpowers. I'm glad to see it's a theme of this year's conference. The idea is gaining popularity. And it's an important one because every game-changing technology has represented new superpowers. The thing about AR and VR is they represent all of these combined. What I couldn't say 2 years ago was that 3 years earlier, I had started working on a secret project at Microsoft. I had joined Xbox Incubations, and it was the perfect time. Management came and said, we're trying to figure out what to do with the next generation console. We're trying to figure out where to go. We don't want something that's just 10x more powerful. It's got to be game-changing. You've got to build something, or at least design something, that we could put in a lot of money, up to $1 billion. We could gain a lead. We can get a technological advantage. That would be worth something. It would be the kind of investment they want to make. And something that scares us, because if it scares us, it'll scare everybody. Well, I had worked on a lot of things before, and I had a few ideas. In the 90s, I worked on a $20 million VR system that Disney put together. It was spending $20 million to buy a 10 or 15-year vision into the future. The hardware was just about as powerful as an Xbox, but it cost $1 million. And that's okay, because it was about experimenting with what we could do with this technology. I also worked on Google Earth, and Second Life contributed. And in 2008, I joined Microsoft to work on a project that was actually called First Life, at least its code name. And it was about bringing AR-like experiences to Bing. Now, unfortunately, in 2008, not everybody saw the value of mobile, and that project never went anywhere. So I went to work on a few other things. I worked on collaborative social avatars, and I worked on holographic 3D video, which led me to Xbox Incubations and to help push a project that was originally called Screen Zero. One screen to rule them all. That turned into Fortaleza, turned into HoloLens, and you see the results today. Hopefully, not too long from now, you'll be able to try this out for yourself. Now, when I say holographic TP, let's be really clear, I'm not talking about toilet paper. Holographic toilet paper would probably be the worst idea ever. But I should be also really clear that even though I was there at the beginning, I'm not taking credit, hundreds if not thousands of people worked on this. It took a massive effort. I'm not kidding about the scale of this operation to be able to pull this off. And I'm super impressed with the result. It's really just amazing. So augmented reality is really coming. It's why we're all here. It's why we're all excited about this technology. And I could take a rough guess at the level of investment. And of course, VR is exploding again. Who would have thought? 20 years after I started working on VR, that people would come along and revive it and make it go again. But the thing about VR that's interesting, and to contrast it with AR, I'm not going to talk about the difference in the technology. I talked about that last time. But the difference is in the experiences. So Pirates of the Caribbean is sort of the prototypical VR experience. It's called a dark ride. That's a lot of what Disney does. It turns out the best VR experiences now and for the near term are going to be dark rides. They're going to be these really amazing immersive experiences that take you somewhere else. They emotionally impact you, but at the end of the day, they have very little relevance to your real life, and that's okay. Escapism is great. I love movies, I love games. We all need a bit of escape. The difference with AR, the way I'd characterize this is high presence, low relevance. The difference with AR is even bad AR, and this is a great video, but it depicts some really bad AR, has high relevance to your life, okay? What does that mean? It means it's about you. It's about your world. By definition, AR is building on the world around you. It has to be. It's centered on you and your life, which goes to the theme of what I'm talking about. It's about people. And we'll get to this by the end. So relevance also has an economic impact. If you want to look at the difference between the market sizes of video games and VR and movies, it's great, it's huge. But simply talking to your friends is huger by an order of magnitude. And the same will go with AR. And it's because it's about your life. It's relevant. Why? We spend most of our time in our real lives. We spend most of our money in our real lives. We care the most about our real lives. It's only natural that these kinds of experiences would be worth that much more. So I hinted that there is a dark side, and if you listened to David Brin this morning, you got a good taste of that. Any new technology, when it is still not evenly distributed, has the risk of disproportionate power in some people's hands. And this technology is so powerful. We saw this a little bit with Google Glass. We saw a backlash. We saw people reacting when somebody had power over them simply to take pictures of them. People reacted with disdain. In this case, we have a few more things to worry about than just simply having our pictures taken. So in AR and VR, you're easier to digitize. By definition, we're trying to monitor you. We're trying to see where you're looking, what you're doing, even how you're feeling. We mediate your interactions. We can control what you see. And we can stimulate and measure those reactions to learn about you. And this is the subtle risk. This is the subtle danger that I don't think we talk about quite enough, is that we won't necessarily even know what's going on behind the scenes. For example, Facebook recently got outed for doing some experiments on people without their consent. Now, there's nothing wrong with experimentation. Experiments are good. Science is good. This is how we progress. Science seeks the truth. But when you experiment without informed consent, you're pushing it too far. And I think Facebook realized that, and they've backtracked a little bit. What does informed consent mean? It means that you have to go the extra mile to actually get the consent. People have to understand that a EULA, a privacy notice, is simply not enough. You actually have to ensure that the people understand what's happening, where the data is going, and how it's going to be used. I had the honor of working with Randy Pausch 20 years ago and on the Disney ride, the Aladdin's Magic Carpet ride. He came in to study how people were using VR. This is a positive example. We had informed consent. Everybody, hundreds of thousands of people who came through and used this VR system, which, by the way, the HMD still rivals some of the things you'll see on the floor today. Cost $100,000, but it was pretty good. One of the things that we did was we monitored the gaze of all the people who wore the HMD. We wanted to know how it was working. What happens when they look at the world? What are they looking at? What's effective about our storytelling? And one of the side effects of this was some interesting data that we couldn't quite figure out. We saw an anomaly. We saw that men on average looked straight ahead. Women on average looked 15 degrees to the left. Couldn't really figure out any anatomical reason why that would be true. It turns out, we finally figured this out and traced it. The ride consisted, I don't know how many of you tried this 20 years ago, consisted of a motorcycle seat. This is in Florida, and it's hot, and a lot of women wore skirts. So they would sit side saddle. Sitting side saddle, you're naturally a little bit turned. That resulted in the data. But the fact was, by simply looking at the data, we could tell if you were wearing a skirt. And there's a lot more that you can tell about people. So there's another study that I wanted to highlight, and it relates to sex offenders. So sex offenders were put into VR, and they were shown risky scenes, and their reactions were monitored. I'm not going to get into the details about how they were monitored. Let's leave that aside. But if we think about this, the same principle can apply to us. We're going to have face tracking, gesture tracking, emotional sensing already have pulse. We can have pupil dilation. We can get galvanic skin response, EEG. All these things are super cheap. There are brain sensing devices already out there. They're intended for good. But depending on who uses them and what the purpose is, they can be used to exploit us, even to enslave us, potentially, in the wrong hands. You all remember the Matrix. Did you look at the woman in red? Well, if you were in this Matrix, we would know you did, and we would know something about you. So Tobii provides some great hardware that's used for studying consumer behavior, shopping behavior. They produce eye trackers. So the woman on the left is looking at products. The person is watching what that woman is looking at through her eyes, effectively. Another study was done with men and women to look at the difference between how they perceive the same pictures and what they look at. So what you're seeing is a heat map of where their eyes looked. Conclusion, men have no idea what they're looking at half the time. But this is not necessarily to scare you. This is really to open your eyes as to the kinds of things that are going on, even while we're looking at all the exciting, game-changing, superpower uses of this. This isn't about you. Don't worry. I'm not that interesting. You're not that interesting. Nobody really wants to know the details. But it's about the business models of various companies. And if you don't like the business models, then don't do business with the company. That's really the bottom line. You are in charge. You get to choose. You get to vote with your dollars and with your eyeballs and your time. Apple's a good example of a positive thing. They have changed their privacy policies lately. They're collecting tons of information about us. And now they're saying, good, we're going to keep the information on the device. We're going to encrypt it. We're not even going to put it in the cloud. All those fears about people who are going to subpoena the information and use it, don't worry about it. So, great. But the thing I'd love to see from Apple next is another leap. And that is to say, you own your data. Okay? It's not just that we helped you collect it. You own it. And the value proposition that they can offer is, let us help you put it to work. And if you don't want to, you don't. And a great example of that is now HealthKit, where they collect your health information and they offer opt-in that you can use this to make it parts of studies. The next step might be to actually compensate you, right? They may already be doing that, I'm not aware. But the same can be true for how your data is used around the web. You own it, it's yours. So to recap so far, big companies with a variety of business models are bringing big magic to the world. It can either liberate us or it can enslave us. We're in charge, we have the power, we should pick. So here's how. I'm going to spend the few minutes I have remaining to talk about the positives of how we can actually make this happen. So I'm going to argue that the way to solve this is by giving people choice. And the more choices, the better. The web is the best model we have of open choice. It's a bit of a Wild West. There are so many options out there. But in contrast to the closed ecosystems that we see, the web is the way to go. Again, you should own your content. It's yours, you created it, we should make that really clear. And as a result, you should create the world that you want to live in. These are some arguments against that I've heard over the years. Tony Parise is in the audience, he's heard these a million times as well, that web technologies are not as good in a lot of ways. And a lot of these arguments, frankly, they're true in a lot of cases, but they don't have to be true, okay? We can force the people who make the browsers. I'm going to praise Apple, and I'm also going to ding them because their mobile browsers are not as good. They're choosing to not put the same technologies in that they put into the native code and even into the native browsers. And that's not right. We should be demanding parity. Web technologies are running on the same hardware. They can do exactly the same things that any native code can do. I think, and WebGL proves that. You have access to the same hardware, you get the same results. This is how the web won. Okay? The web didn't win as a series of pre-compiled apps, right? It didn't happen. It didn't take off. We saw that. We saw companies who denied the internet for a long time build those apps, and they didn't have the same kind of impact that the web has had. It's because the content is device independent, it's dynamically and neutrally available, it's viewable, copyable, and even mashable. AR and VR will need the same exact transformation in order for them to succeed. So, just some pictures to help you understand. For web technologies, there's all different shapes and sizes of devices. For AR and VR, there's all different fields of view, resolutions, depth of field. The features vary even more so than they do between tablets and PCs and phones. If we want to build content that addresses all of those, it's going to have to be built in a flexible way with scripting. Okay? There's just no choice about it. And the same for data. If you think about it, there are millions of people out there who are self-taught, who learn to program the web by view source and stack exchange. We need to do exactly the same thing for AR and VR. Make these examples available, make them mashable. The way I learn how to do new things is I take existing code and modify it until it does what I want it to do. That's always my first instance. Thank you. I'm not done yet. So here's a great example of where content needs to be adaptable. Okay? We have a HoloLens show. This is a beautiful idea and executed well. The furniture becomes part of the experience. You don't want to see virtual content disappearing inside your furniture. So the room is mapped, and the content is draped over the furniture. Same thing has to happen for people, and as I'll talk in a second, the same thing has to happen for the world. I went the wrong way. The content has to be mashable. Okay? Avoid the walled gardens and the exclusive app stores. Yeah, that's where the money is. Everybody flocks to the app store because you can make a lot of money very quickly. It's really hard to monetize out there on the web compared to just being able to put your app in the app store. But if I think about YouTube as a Wild West kind of open market versus the app store has way more clones, way more rip-offs than I see in YouTube. YouTube has way more inspiration and new things that I never would have thought about. DRM, not to spend too much time on it, but DRM doesn't solve anything. It doesn't prevent copying, it just makes things suck. This is one of the most important things, is that the content needs to be linkable. What made the web work is that it could be interwoven. But here, this isn't just a series of web pages that need to be interwoven. It's people, actual people, places and things. But people need to be protected in terms of the privacy. There's no doubt about that. The best model for how this works is Facebook, and while I might criticize them on their business model, something like Open Graph is absolutely brilliant. Their engineering is top-notch. What we need is essentially Open Graph for the world. We need people and places and things linked together in such a way that if you don't have authorization, then your content is protected. If you do, it's interlinked with everything else. What we wind up building is a giant graph of all things, something we jokingly call the GOAT. And that graph is available to applications that have permission. And if so, you can build incredibly rich content that includes the real people and the real places, and it's dynamic and it's adaptable. Finally, you own the content, it's yours. If it were as simple as putting it out there, well, we would already have it. Copyright says, at least in this country, copyright says if I publish it, I own it. Well, why can't that be true of our own data as well? Can't we publish our data in such a way that it's protected, we get the copyright, nobody can take it, and we get the security like in the way FaceGuard works. We need a markup language for reality, an expression language for content. Again, these things are being worked on. There's ARML, there's WebGL, there's all these tools out there, Collada. We need to bring those together and build the next step on top. All right, so in a closing thought, I'm out of time. The reason I call this talk the Internet of People is We're all members of the Internet of People. It's not about the wearables. It's not about the technology. We're all here because we want to make amazing things that impress people, that show them what the world can be. So let's not forget that. Let's remember that it's the people that we care about, it's the people that we respect, and it all comes down to how we treat people. Thank you.
Thank you. Another round of applause for Avi, everybody.